Welcome to Roadcase, the podcast that explores the live music experience. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Josh Rosenberg, and I'll be taking you on a journey through in-depth interviews with performers and key people in the industry to explore the magic of live music, how it can be totally transformative for both fans and performers, and we'll look at how they take it all out on the road. It's going to be a great ride, so here we go. Okay, everyone, welcome back to Roadcase. Thanks for joining me. I'm your host, Josh Rosenberg. We got a lot of great episodes coming up this month, and this one's no exception. Want to encourage everyone to get involved in the Roadcase community, and there's a couple different ways you can do that. We love email, so please email me at info@roadcasepod.com. You can send your questions, comments, even suggestions for guests there. And you can also get involved by following Roadcase on the socials. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and our handle's @RoadcasePod. We also have a YouTube channel called Roadcase Podcast. And you can also support this podcast on Patreon if you'd like. We have a Patreon site, patreon.com/roadcasepod. And if you are part of our Patreon community, you'll have access to special episodes that will only be available to Patreon members. So rush over and do that as soon as you can. And of course, you can listen to this podcast on your favorite listening platform, and please hit those stars to rate us and let us know how you think, what you think of the podcast by reviewing us as well. So today I'm really excited to welcome Denise Kaufman to Roadcase. Denise is a bassist, and she is the member of the pioneering all-female rock band from the 1960s called Ace of Cups, who ironically just released their first album in 2018. Back in the 60s, they never had a record deal, so they were musicians along the way. Some of them were moms. They had family, kids, and but were always playing music, came back and got together, started playing several years ago together, and finally released an album. But Denise was center stage to the 1960s counterculture movement and music at the time. She seemed to cross paths with everyone from Jerry Garcia to Pigpen to Wavy Gravy. In fact, she was on the Ken Kesey's bus of Merry Pranksters and traveled in California on that bus down to Mexico, was at all the Grateful Dead acid tests. In fact, years before they played, Pigpen and Jerry Garcia played at her high school graduation, which is like crazy to me. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But having been really in the center of the 60s music scene in the Bay Area, Denise kind of seemed to meet so many different people that influenced her life and her social life and her musical life. In fact, while she was in the hospital, and we'll talk about this a little bit, in San Francisco, upstairs in a room, she met who would become her future manager, Ambrose Hollingsworth, who also managed Quicksilver Messenger Service. So she just had this way, and you'll understand this from Denise. She's such a sweet, affable, and amazing human. She just had a way of meeting people at the time. She seemed to always be in the right place at the right time, but also she's just one of those kind of people that you want to meet and you want to talk to, and that really comes forward as well. And it's so interesting to hear all these stories about people that she crossed paths with. And at the time, Ace of Cups was quite the phenomenon, and very unique in being an all-female band, and they were in demand to play and to open for many of the biggest bands. They opened for Hendrix, whom they met at Monterey Pop Festival in 1967 when Hendrix lit his guitar on fire, and she tells the story about how Hendrix borrowed their equipment at a show that they opened for them in the Panhandle district in San Francisco. They crossed paths with the band and the Grateful Dead and Janis Janis Joplin. So we'll hear a lot of stories about that. And even Bobby Weir plays on Ace of Cups' most recent album called Sing Your Dreams. That's their second album they released just last year, or just at the end of 2019. So, she's still very close with a lot of these people. She's also a yoga practitioner, as am I. So we talk about that a little bit. And she lives in Hawaii and is an avid surfer and just an all-around active person and musician and super interesting woman to talk to. And I really enjoyed this interview with Denise Kaufman of Ace of Cups and of Merry Prankster fame. So I know you'll really enjoy a lot of these stories from the 1960s. If you're a big fan of the psychedelic rock scene, you'll really enjoy this interview with Denise. I know I did. So thanks again for joining me here at Roadcase, and here we go. Got Denise Kaufman here, who's joining me from Kauai. Hi, Denise. How are you?
Hi. How are you doing, Josh?
I'm good. It's so great to that you took the time to come on the show. I'm so excited to talk to you. Could you give me a little history of how you got into music? I know that's a general question, but kind of where you grew up and how you were influenced by those times.
So I was born in San Francisco, actually at UC Hospital, which was right in the upper Haight-Ashbury, which was a portent of things to come.
Yeah.
So, and my parents lived in the city, but they weren't from San Francisco, but my dad had been stationed there in the war, in the Presidio. So that's why they ended up in San Francisco, and fell in love with the city. My early music, we had a piano. My mother was a really lovely trained singer, and more sort of classical and kind of popular. She was from England, and so, and my dad couldn't sing a note or keep it pitch, but he remembered every lyric, and he was a literature major in college. So,
well, that's that's one of the first hurdles, is remembering the words.
Yes, exactly. So, a good night with my dad after dinner would be reading Shakespeare,
Yeah. Okay.
So that he gave me the appreciation of the lyric and the literature. And my mom was actually a writer too, but she, had a beautiful voice. But our family, there was a piano, and I remember, playing from real little. So there was just always music around my life. And from the time I was little, I started taking piano lessons and at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. And then by the time I was like 12, I was rebelling against all of that. And my mom started playing guitar, and she from one of those, somebody on television, Laura Weber's guitar lessons on television. And she got this old K guitar, and she didn't last very long on guitar. She had nice fingernails, and she couldn't. It was a steel string guitar, right? So I took over the guitar, and that was in the early days of folk music. And folk music becoming more popular. The Kingston Trio, the Limelighters in San Francisco, people like those were all West Coast. But then that easily led me, into the New Lost City Ramblers, and I'd known Pete Seeger from when I was little, because he used to play at the local school, and I used to love his music, and so those were some early influences. And of course, as I got older, I got really into sort of ballads that came from England to Appalachia, and just kind of that kind of folk lineage, those lineages.
Right.
But then I was also into doo-wop. What was on the radio, and singing with my junior high school or high school girlfriends, and just singing harmonies. And then I was in the San Francisco Children's Opera, which was a operetta company that was just wonderful. So I was in that for years, and so I had a lot of influences musically.
How did you first get into, now skipping forward a couple of years, you had the music background clearly and had the interest. How did you first kind of get into counterculture and the social um, uprest or unrest,
Yeah.
upheavals, changes that were going on at the time? I know you told me you went to Berkeley and you have some experiences there, but I was wondering what the first instances of getting involved in the social setting that was going on in the Bay Area at the time.
Well, my parents were activists in the community generally. My dad led a fair housing fight issue in San Francisco. They were um, liberals, and so I think it was on my first picket line when I was 14, a civil rights picket
Wow.
line,
Hmm.
and they were just liberals and stood for social justice, and
Right. Right.
so I went to high school. My last 2 years of high school down in Palo Alto.
Hmm.
Um, and so before that, I was, hanging out in the folk clubs in San Francisco, basically sneaking out to the folk clubs because my folks didn't want me to be there, but I was hanging out. So I was hearing and meeting people and, hearing everybody, Barbara Dane, Judy Henske, and then the local folk singers, people that would travel through. But when I went to Palo Alto to school, that was Joan Baez era, right? And
Yeah.
she was from
Yeah.
that era. And there was a bookstore, Ivory Sand Pearl's bookstore in Palo Alto. And so I used to go there. So there was a lot of civil rights and social justice. There was I wouldn't say that it was all of Palo Alto was like that, because it wasn't, but there
Right.
were pockets. And I was in the Stanford Folk Music Club when I was in high school still, and also and those Stanford students that were my kind of mentors.
Hmm.
Some of them had gone and did go for the years that I was there to the Freedom Summer, and
Right.
so
Yep.
I got a chance to hang out with Stanford grad students who came back from um, you know voter registration in the South.
Did you hear any components there of what was to become the San Francisco sound? I mean, because didn't Bobby Weir
Yeah,
live down in Atherton, which is nearby?
right.
Jerry Garcia was around in that area,
Yeah.
teaching music somewhere. I don't know if that was Palo Alto or. Did you ever cross paths with those
Yes,
people
with
there at
all of
that
them.
time?
So
Uh huh.
my local music store was where Jerry taught.
Wasn't that Magoo?
Dana
Was that
Morgan,
Magoo?
Dana
Oh,
Morgan
Dana
Music.
Morgan. Right,
Yeah,
right, right.
and then
Magoo's was where some of the first shows happened. Yeah.
I was living my senior year. We got an apartment down there, so I didn't have to be a boarding student, so I could get out more. And that was
Yeah.
on the same street that the Tangent was on, which was where Jerry played with his jug band and his bluegrass band. So I was a regular at the Tangent in those days. So I heard
Wow.
Jerry and
Mother McCree's Uptown Jug
exactly.
Band.
And then
Right.
I was also a fan of a band called the Zodiacs, which
Hmm.
I had heard at some high school event somewhere. And so for my high school graduation party, I hired the Zodiacs to play the after party, which was like, from 1 to 5 in the morning. And
Right.
and that band was Jerry and Pigpen. So I
No
hired them for my high
kidding.
school graduation. Yeah.
Jerry and Pigpen played at your high school graduation. So what was
And the whole band was a like a R&B kind of R&B rocking
do you
band.
remember any tunes they played?
No, I don't. Well, I'm sure that because um, I'm sure they were already playing this stuff. Some of the stuff that Pigpen did early on in the Grateful Dead, like
Yeah.
Midnight Hour and Love Light
Right,
and
right.
things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. Wow, wow.
But yeah, yeah,
That would be called crossing paths with the
yes,
Grateful
yeah,
Dead.
exactly.
So what and then did you eventually land in Berkeley, or were you always living in Palo Alto at the time?
Well, after I graduated from high school in June of '64,
Uh-huh.
I went to Stanford Summer School for the summer and studied Shakespeare and Latin American studies. And then I went into Berkeley in the fall, and
Okay.
that. And so I started in September. I was still 17. Got a couple of weeks into being there. I mean, I went there for the political
Right.
that's why I went there. And because for me, music and politics were always one. There
Yeah,
was,
yeah, especially
there was
then everything
something,
was kind of
you
intertwined.
know, exactly. And,
Yeah, yeah,
to think early Dylan, right?
right. Yeah, of
Everything.
course, of
So,
course. Yeah.
so, uh, so, um, it was only a couple of weeks into school there that free speech movement started. The campus police came in, or they took away the tables where everybody was disseminating all their political information. And I had gone there for those tables. I was like
Yeah,
ecstatic to go and get every brochure I could from every political group and hear everybody talk and stand on their basic, their soapboxes. And
yeah, yeah.
so that
And the
was that
police
was
just
that.
ca and the police came right in and just said, "Oh, you can't pass out these pamphlets
Well,
here."
they made everybody take off the tables because they said, it was the whole
Was it
basis of the free speech movement was that, you know, that these groups were not allowed on the campus. And we were like, this is, just because we enrolled in this school and walked on this campus, we didn't give up our freedom of speech or rights to freedom of
right,
speech
right.
and freedom of assembly. So, it was because the Board of Regents of the University of California didn't want students organizing from the centers, Berkeley being a major Catalyst center, to go either picket the car dealerships on Van Ness Avenue in San Francisco that were, you know, uh, that basically wouldn't hire any African Americans, or the theater chains in San Francisco that in the South were segregated. I mean, all of those. So they did not want their businesses affected. And they were on the Board of
Yeah,
Regents of the state, the University of
right.
Cal,
Yeah,
all
yeah,
the
yeah.
universities.
Mhm.
So we just took it on. And,
Yeah, that's great. I mean, 20 years later, when I was at UCSB, we were doing the same thing against apartheid and moving for divestment of the University of California assets in South Africa. So thank you for
yes,
laying the
exactly.
groundwork on the protest against the UC Regents, because we were doing the same thing 20 years later.
And thank you for keeping it going. And
Yeah, right
yes,
on.
really important. That was hugely important, divesting. Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we talked earlier about how I was born in Berkeley, and I have great connections to Berkeley and the UC system. Obviously, I went to school down south, but in Santa Barbara. But so when did you meet your bandmates, and how did that? What was the what? How did that kind of come about?
Should
Not
there? There's
only
okay.
there's one other.
There's one other piece you should probably know.
Please, yeah, let me
So
know.
at the end of my freshman year, going into my sophomore year at Berkeley,
Mm-hmm.
during the second semester of my freshman year, I started experimenting with LSD
Yeah.
and playing. I was playing with some musicians, and we went to a conference down in Monterey, and our guitar player's father was the head of it was a Unitarian conference for
Mm-hmm.
the Unitarian Ministry National Conference, and the keynote speaker was Kesey and the
Uh-huh.
Pranksters, and
Ken
that's where I
Kesey.
met them. We drove onto this conference ground and spent the weekend with them. And the next week, Kesey came up and got me and said, "I've come to get you. You're coming to live at La Honda." So
Nice.
that's when I got on the
That
bus.
would that would be a big spot, yeah. So, what was La Honda like from your perspective? And this was the farm and sort of
Yes,
ranch that they lived in up, north,
Palo Alto.
tel
Yeah, it's like
oh, in
west
Pal
of Palo Alto, yeah,
Uh-huh.
above the hill in Palo Alto. And so that's it. I dropped out of Berkeley at that point and got on the bus, and I was on the bus for the next year. Um,
Yeah, wow.
until Kizzy got busted and went to Mexico a little bit. Well, actually, until the bus went to until the pranksters went to Mexico, because we kept doing. We did some more acid tests after he was already gone. But
So that
so
was like 65 timeframe, some of the
yes,
original
yes,
original acid tests.
yeah, and it was the beginning of the Grateful Dead.
Yep.
The Warlock shifting to the Grateful Dead,
Right,
and yeah, and the
right.
Trips Festival and all of those all those times.
Wow, so did you actually drive on the further bus? Was that part of the whole
Yes,
thing? Like, you went down to did acid test in LA, came around, or
yes, exactly.
what did that look like just driving in that bus? You were on the bus, like,
Yes.
what the fuck? Yeah,
So,
wow.
well, first of all, one of my favorite places to be on the bus was there's a little metal box that was just as you enter to the front door of the bus. There was a little metal box that was connected to the floor, and I used to sit there next to Neil when he would be driving and
Mm-hmm.
rapping. So and I
Yeah.
would just spend a lot of hours on the bus just hearing Neil's monologue of, cosmic monologue. And I would just either close my eyes or sometimes open my eyes, but a lot of times I
So
was just like in the hypnotic moments of Neil
wow. So
Cassidy.
Cowboy Neil was really at the wheel,
Yes,
as they
a lot of the time. I
as the
mean, George
song goes.
Walker was sometimes would, but mostly it was Neil.
I was always fascinated by when Bob Weir would say that, Neil could drive in downtown traffic at 60 miles an hour, and somehow, I don't know if he's making that up or what, but clearly he had a reputation as being a driver. But
Yeah,
what kind of are your impressions of that time now looking back?
I think um, when there's like kind of a stone dropped in the water and there's a ripple effect.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting thing to look back and kind of see. I mean, we knew that we were exploring new realms and
Right.
bringing them in and hopefully making them available or making them, being able the acid tests were creating this container for people to get out of what the kind of given reality that we're all raised with some given reality, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so to be able to find a place where they could let go if they wanted to, and take acid if they wanted to, and
Yeah.
then, and open those channels, open those tentacles
Yeah.
of energy. Um, it's I'm really really grateful that I got to be, that I was like sucked into that world,
Yeah, yeah,
when
which
I was.
obviously had so much impact, like physical, spiritually, and
Yes.
music played a huge part in it. Can you tell me a lot about that?
Well, the Grateful Dead, that was our band. And
Yep. Yeah.
so getting to, and, because I'd heard Jerry in the earlier iterations and Pig, and then the Zodiacs and everything, it was really super great to be able to have the, to be able to kind of continue a saga with them. I was really close to Pigpen, particularly, and Jerry. I knew everybody, but I never sort of hung out with Phil, hung out with Bobby some, and Bobby
Mhm.
and I became, Bobby and Mountain Girl and I were all about the same age, and we were kind of younger than everybody else,
Yeah, and
except for
clearly you've kept in
Crazy's
touch with
kids.
Bobby, right? Because he plays on the latest he does a couple tracks on
Yeah,
your
and
latest
Bobby and I
album
have
with you.
done through
Yeah,
the years.
it's amazing.
Years ago, he came to Kauai and stayed with me and played in the band that I had here for a little
Oh,
while.
oh my
And
god, that's
and
totally cool.
and Matthew Kelly, who is really close to Bobby, Matt Kelly came at
Yeah,
that same time, and he stayed here for a year, and we played in a band together.
right.
And we had this country band called the Silverados, and Matt
Nice.
joined it, and so,
Right on.
yeah, and Bobby, and I've been into yoga for ever, and I'm a vegan, and so Bobby and I have shared yoga through the years and
Mhm.
all that kind of health interest in health, and especially now.
But this is also a bigger picture of physical and
Yes.
spirituality, of those worlds. And what we were talking before about the music and how that entered into being on the bus, et cetera. And what was it like to be at an acid test at that time? What was the first one that you went to?
Well, the first one we did, there weren't acid tests. I mean,
So you were at
oh
you obviously you got on the bus
yeah.
before they were going on early on, and then what was the first one?
The first one was kind of a, we didn't exactly call it that, but it was like a
Yeah.
prototypical one down in or a, sort of the precursor, you could call it the first acid test, but it
Yeah.
was down at Ken Babbs's spread in SoCal by Santa Cruz.
Okay.
And then the next one was in San Jose, at the house of this guy who called himself Big Nig. And with
Okay.
this big old, like, funky Victorian place. And then after that, we did acid tests, and Muir Beach was a very big, really epic
Yeah.
one. They're all
Yeah.
epic in their own way. And
Yeah,
then
for sure.
um, there was one at the Big Beat, which was a club in East Palo Alto that was uh, changing ownership or something. So it was unoccupied at the time, and we were able to get the Big Beat Club for an acid test.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes. And then eventually that led to the Trips festivals. And we also did acid tests up in Oregon. And, we went, and then later we went down to LA and did the Watts acid test and some other acid tests there.
And were the Dead playing at all of these?
Pretty much. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was that like? That was just
Great.
an all night, just a 6-hour, 8-hour marathon of incredible music and
More like 12, but, or 10, 8, 10, 10 or 12, but yeah.
Right.
And yeah, it was amazing, and that's when, we had, we'd wire the room with echo units and things like that and lights. And so, with the Dead weren't playing, then Neil or Ken Babs or Kesey or people would be like kind of rapping on the system with everything echoing all around and strobe lights going. And it was
right. Wow. It's
yeah.
the true expression and of music, really, and the coming together of everyone to be part of the whole spectacle. Really, there's
just the
really was
whole. You don't
there's
need
no
another
fourth wall.
word.
Yeah, there was nothing. Right. It was just it's all
But
coming together. It's what even today in shows occur. I mean, there's a wall at the stage now, a little less in some shows, a little more in other shows, depending on the
right.
performers. But there it was all broken through, which is
Yeah.
beautiful and amazing to me as a lover of live music.
And Wavy Gravy was another key being in that circuit,
Mhm.
and as really dear friends of
Yeah,
Wavy and Jahannaram. Yeah.
and
I got into yoga really at the end of I'd taken so much acid, and I just was like, I hated coming down from it because I hated like losing that sense of really feeling the universality and oneness. And so at a certain point, I was like, I have to figure out how to access this without taking in some substance.
right.
And then
Yeah.
I started going to Esalen Institute, and I was just that, and it really drew me into yoga, and everything else was like, okay, human beings have explored these realms forever, and I just need to find some of the wisdom.
A way to tap in physically
Yeah.
without acid.
Yeah.
And that's been
I
success. That's been successful for you.
yes. I mean, it's not like I would never or don't ever do psychedelics, but
Yeah.
I was doing them a lot, and I just wanted to have other pathways into that universal space.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes.
So when Kesey went down or when the bus went down to Mexico, did you do that as well?
No, I came back to San Francisco because I wanted to play music. I just couldn't. I just was really drawn to be in the city, and I ended up joining a band that became Moby Grape.
Okay.
And I played with. It was like, well, they had come from Seattle. They were a band called the Frantics in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
They had come to San Francisco and asked me to join. And at the time, it was Jerry Miller on guitar, Don Stevenson on drums, Charlie Schoening, also known as Chuck Stakes, on B3, playing the bass and then me on harmonica and singing with them, sometimes guitar. But that band, I just wasn't it wasn't where I wanted to be. So eventually, actually, and then Charlie as well. So Charlie and I and my friend Martha Wenner, who had been staying with us, we all left and moved to the Haight-Ashbury. They were living down the peninsula, and we moved out of that house and moved to the Haight-Ashbury and got a Victorian with John Kahn, who was 17 at the time, and
wow. Future bass player for Jerry.
And, yeah. So, and then my parents committed me to the mental hospital in San Francisco because LSD was getting really bad publicity. I mean, when I started taking it, it wasn't illegal, just was not on the radar. But then when it became illegal and then was getting all this terrible publicity, they just got really frightened, and nothing really happened that they did. I think it just built up that they were so afraid that they tricked me into going to Mount Zion Hospital in San Francisco. And and that's what Kesey, the pranksters were still in Mexico. And and the doctors there just said, we can't totally keep you here because you're 18. But we also know you're under 21. If your parents are so afraid, they could go to court and get you committed to like Napa if they wanted to. And so we think you should stay here and do some family therapy and, just kind of calm things down. And I knew I didn't want to go to Napa. And
was that a
that's a
mental
state
institution?
hospital up in, it was like, you definitely didn't want to be there. I don't think in retrospect, they would have done that, but they were frightened. So, but it all kind of worked out because I was in the hospital and I was doing, therapy with them. And I was living on this psych ward, and I brought all my instruments in, and I had like a little drum kit in the room. I had amps. I had, I just took over. And then I got, part of the deal was I had to have a job to leave. I had to have first and last month's rent to get my own place, and I had to have a job. Yep. So Ralph Gleason helped me get a job at Fantasy Records with Max Weiss. And there was which was a little company at the time in south of Market in San Francisco on Treat Street. Mm-hmm. And I was working there, running the office and doing the PR for Fantasy. And so I'd take a bus every day to work and come back to the psych ward at night. I could still go out and hear music. And it was during that time that, first of all, upstairs in the same hospital, one of the therapists there said, you should go up and meet this guy on the top floor, on the 8th floor. And he was, he's a musician like you. And and he'd been in a terrible car accident. And I went up and met him, and it was Ambrose Hollingsworth, who was managing Quicksilver Messenger Service, and then got in this accident and lost the use of his legs. And he was in the hospital. And his roommate, Leslie Scardelli, had been in an accident and become a quadriplegic. And I started going up there, hanging out with Leslie and Ambrose, and then writing songs with Ambrose. Was a wonderful writer. And I would take either his lyric and put it to music. And we were just totally writing. And then one night on December 31st, 1966, I went to a party at Blue Cheer's house, a New Year's party, and walked into a room, and they were big Victorian, and met Mary Ellen Simpson, who was playing some blues. And I pulled out a harmonica and we jammed. And she told me that she and some other women were starting a band and I should come and meet them. And that was how I met the Ace of Cups. And wow. I had never heard of an all-women band. I mean, I didn't know any all-women band. I never thought about an all-women band. I've always
What was your first reaction So what was your reaction when she first asked you that?
I thought, that sounds so weird. I couldn't imagine it. I was like, because I'd never seen any women like, playing drums. I just hadn't seen it.
Yeah, there were women solo artists, folk artists, Joan Baez, obviously, others, fronting bands, right? Individuals in bands, but wow, I think it's just so amazing that occurred and that you were a part of that. It's so cool. But so what were some of the so you got together with the other women. How long did it take before you kind of coalesced into what became Ace of Cups?
The first day.
Oh, okay. So that's
we just I had a bunch of songs. I brought songs in. We started writing right from the get-go. Yeah. And that was January of 66, right? No, okay. No, 67, excuse me. Yeah, January 1967. We started writing songs. I brought everybody up to meet Ambrose in the hospital. Right. Because I was still living in the hospital. I'd go to rehearsal, come back.
Was the hospital in the Haight? I forgot.
No, the hospital was near there. It was on Divisadero and Sutter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not too far away. Yeah. Okay.
And so I would come back. And so I brought everybody to meet Ambrose up on the 8th floor, and we sang for him. And he said, "I want to manage you." And wow. And by then we'd gone from practicing in the little apartment on Waller Street where a couple of the bandmates lived, to Max Weiss letting us practice at Fantasy Records. We used the studio there 3 nights a week to practice. And Max also signed for us to rent some gear because we hardly had any. So there was a music store in Oakland, and we got to go there, and we women couldn't, you didn't have credit cards. Women couldn't have credit cards in those days unless their husbands signed for it.
Wow,
Right.
Jesus, yeah,
So Max signed for us to be able to rent. We had
yeah.
equipment, and the other band that practiced there was one other young person who worked at Fantasy, and that was John Fogarty. And he was working in the
Wow.
record packing room, and he had a band called the Gollywogs, and they practiced there 3 nights a week, and we practiced there 3 nights a week. And
Yeah.
you know, um,
Wow, you just
yeah,
ran across everybody. That's
yeah.
amazing. So, what was the progression? I know you were on you started to get on a ton of bills eventually,
Not
playing
eventually,
with
pretty quickly.
Did you really? So
Yeah.
when did that occur?
So, we got together in January of 67. 2 months later, Ambrose and Leslie rented us a house in Mill Valley up in the hills,
Uh-huh.
or Tam Valley, so that we could quit our day jobs and just focus on practicing and playing and writing. That was like March, April.
Right.
Um, Pretty soon, so we were writing a lot of songs. And Mike Bloomfield was a friend of our circle of, because our friend Ron Pulte, who became our second manager.
Yeah.
Through Ron, we met Ron and Ambrose. We met Michael, and that was also through Nick Ravenitis. And they were putting the
Mhm.
Electric Flag together, and they asked if they could do that at our house because we had this big living room overlooking a valley. And so the
Right.
Electric Flag practiced at our house for like maybe 6 weeks, putting their band together. That was
Yeah.
Buddy Miles, who then moved into our house, and Harvey Brooks on bass, and Barry Goldberg, and Mike Bloomfield, and Nick. And
Wow.
so, we had a lot of influence that we could just soak up, and they said, we'll play at your house in the afternoons, and, you can watch how we put things together. And so we'd practice in the mornings and the evenings. So everything was moving pretty quickly. And by the time it was June, the Monterey Pops Festival happened, and the Electric Flag made their debut, and they invited my whole band to go down there as their guests to Monterey Pops. I didn't go,
Yeah.
and our drummer didn't go. She had something else, and I didn't go because I was starting sitar school on Monday, and I wanted a yoga, quiet meditation weekend that weekend. But the rest of the
Uh-huh.
band went,
Yeah.
and they came back, and our guitar player was talking about Jimi Hendrix, and I'd never heard of Jimi Hendrix, right? She's
Right.
just like going, Jimi Hendrix,
Wow.
she was.
Yeah.
And about 2 days later, we got a phone call asking if we wanted to open for Jimi Hendrix in Golden Gate Park. So that weekend we did. So
Wow.
that
Well,
was, we'd played a couple of festivals on Mount Tamp, but it happened pretty quickly from the time we got together. By January
yeah,
and June, we
6
opened for
months or
Jimi
so,
Hendrix.
yeah.
Yeah. So
How did that connection happen with the Hendrix band?
I think it was partly, maybe the Diggers. Actually, I probably am not quite. We knew Albert Grossman, because
Who's
Albert
that?
managed the Electric Flag, and
Oh,
I think he
okay.
was managing Jimmy.
Ah, all
I
right.
think, and that
Uh-huh.
maybe is how it happened. I actually don't remember, and maybe somebody else does.
Right. So
But
what was that like? So you opened for Hendrix when he played where, you said?
in a Panhandle in Golden Gate Park, free concert,
Oh, just like on
flat big
one of
truck, just us
flatbed
and him.
trucks.
Yeah,
Wow, what the
and
fuck?
they
So what
played.
was
If you
that
look
like?
at those, if you look at the pictures from that weekend, which is the weekend after Monterey Pop, the gear that he's playing on is our gear, our dual Showmans and our twin reverbs and Diane's Ludwig drums, and yeah.
Wow,
So yeah,
wow.
and he was a big fan. He loved us. He and Buddy stood right in front of us while we played our set, and he took pictures of us, and he said really nice things about us in the magazine when he got back to England. So he was very sweet to us.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So what was it like what was it like to play at that show and one of those famous shows at the Panhandle, like on one of the flatbed trucks? I've seen pictures of Dead playing those show. Those are some amazing shots,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what was that like to play?
It was fantastic.
Clearly there was a
Yeah.
ton of people there that were Hendrix fans,
Well,
obviously. How were you?
nobody, it was all new. He only, he hadn't been in the US. He'd been in England. He came
Yeah,
to the
yeah.
US. He played Monterey Pop. And it's not like today. It's not like the internet where, all the people there videoed him and then it was all over the internet. I mean, unless I'd never heard of him the week before.
Uh-huh.
Right. And
Yeah.
I wasn't the only one,
Mhm.
So you know, there was a lot of people there, but it was word of mouth and it wasn't, and it was free. And he just wanted to play in the park for free because he was following what was going on in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And so it's not like it would have been, he didn't have a record out that people were buying. In those days,
Yeah,
there
for sure.
was many less ways to get known,
Yeah.
people
Was it a
with
good
the
show?
internet.
Did you like it?
That was
Was it a good show?
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was great. I mean, he totally loved us and we loved him. It was like, and before he went on Mary Ellen, had seen him set his guitar on fire at Monterey. So
Yeah,
she was a
Monterey,
little
yeah.
bit worried about our equipment because we finally had gotten good equipment and had, turned back that rental equipment and we were so happy. And she
Right.
kind of looked a little bit like, I think she was like, yes, you can use it. And then he just looked at her and said, don't worry, I'll take really good care of it. He was not going to
Oh,
set
nice.
our gear on fire. So
Yeah.
he's
Talk about
very, very
represent
kind, very sweet and humble and lovely.
Yeah, that's what I understood.
Yeah.
That must have been super amazing. So what was what did the gigs look like after that, and what was the progression for the band, and, did that bring you guys together?
Yeah, we played a lot of shows after that. We have this wonderful archivist named Corey Arnold, and he's archived pretty much all of our shows. And they're a lot, It's like we look at it like,
Yeah.
wow, we were playing a lot. And, there were a lot, mostly in the Bay Area or in the West Coast, some of them LA and some of them Santa Barbara or, up and down
Mhm.
the coast.
Yep.
And we went on one tour with the airplane opening for the airplane in Seattle and Vancouver, and then we did one show in Chicago that turned partly into Fathers and Sons. It was the first big show after the Chicago riots,
Oh, okay.
and it was with Muddy Waters. It was all blues players
Wow.
and us.
Wow.
It was really
Yeah.
amazing. But other than that, we didn't have a record deal. So we in those days, if you were going to tour away from your local place, you needed to have a record so that you would be on the radio in those places. And then when you went to tour, people would come to see you because they knew who you were. That never happened
Right.
for us then. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So did you ended up opening for a lot of acts so you could
Yeah.
get some kind of, recognized that way and get some exposure that way?
Yeah, and even when we headlined at the Avalon, and we headlined, I mean, for and locally we headlined, but to
Uh-huh.
go out on a tour, people didn't know who we were.
Right. Wow.
So yeah.
And were you still living in you were still living in the Haight at that
No,
time,
we
or
were living
you
in
moved to
Marin
Mill
County.
Valley?
Yeah, we all moved to various places
So was
around.
it true that, like, most of that scene kinda shifted up to, Marin and Mill Valley area even prior to what they call the Summer of Love?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why was that? Why did you guys move out?
Well, we moved out because we wanted to live in a house together and we wanted to be able to have a place to practice. I mean, because we lived in separate places in the Haight, and then we're going to Fantasy to practice,
Uh-huh.
and so, and we had day jobs. And so when we got the chance to all live in one house together and have our equipment there, that really was a coalescing period for us that we really needed.
Right.
And also, as the song about wearing flowers in your hair
Yeah.
got all these people started coming to San Francisco, and the scene really changed. And
Right.
there was a lot of it was just sad. and a lot of the early vision of what could happen there, was altered. And there was early on as much more a sense of community and artists and the various folks the diggers and the mime troupe, and people that were part of a community that was trying to build something or create something new or express something new, in terms of feeding people in the park, which the diggers did regularly.
Right.
But then it just was such an influx of people. And then, hard drugs came into the scene.
Yeah.
There's a lot of history of information about that being a purposefully done thing with the FBI and
to kind of set up people and like
set
get
up the
people
scenes.
hooked and just fucked up the whole thing.
Yeah, well, and also, there was this whole sense of community and psychedelics and all that did not make for people that wanted to be drafted. And so the whole machine that depended on, taking 18-year-old guys and sending them off to Vietnam, that was threatened by everything that was going on, anti-war, opposition to the war, peace and love.
Yeah.
So, there was, some bad influences that, that there were definite intentional disrupting everything that was going on in the scene and just turning it so dark. So eventually.
Yeah. I mean, were you at the time, was your reaction one of relief that you weren't still there and that you were more involved in the music? You started to become more involved in that music at the time, or were you did you find other avenues for social involvement, even living over in Mill Valley?
I mean, the music everything it wasn't separated like that. I mean, just the fact that we didn't live in San Francisco, we played there all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We were in the city often, but we just didn't live there and rehearse there anymore. But we were in there, and we loved the hate, and we loved playing in the park, and we loved going to all the events there. And it was definitely a community center still. And the ballrooms were there, the Fillmore, the Avalon, Winterland, the Carousel Ballroom, everything, at the beach.
Right.
All those things were, the venues, a lot of them were there. There were venues in Marin and Berkeley and other places too, but the San Francisco was still the hub.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Were you, so what was the progression after 68? Kind of what were Ace of Cups doing, and where were you guys playing at that point?
We played, everywhere we played all of the, we played with, every venue in the, Bay Area for sure. And then many throughout California, North and South. And then those couple of tours that I told you about, we recorded backup vocals with Quicksilver and Mike Bloomfield and Jefferson Airplane and Nick Gravenitis. So we'd be, gathered around a mic, doing backup vocals. We did that on the Volunteers album for the Airplane. And so we were playing a lot. We opened for the band for their very first show.
Oh, really?
Which
Where was that?
Winterland. And that was by then sort of the music from Big Pink was a huge hit. And their first show as the band was at Winterland, a 3-night show. And we opened for that show.
Wow.
Which was great. Yeah. Yeah. It was.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was. They were.
And that was a Bill Graham show?
Yeah, Bill Graham.
Yeah. So what was that like? What was Bill like, and what was it like to be on a bill that he was promoting?
We loved him. He was, we all got along really well with Bill, and he mentored us. I mean, he was really good to us. That particular show was kind of memorable because the band had come in, and they hadn't done, from the time they recorded the music from Big Pink, they hadn't done any gigs as the band. They, obviously had played together before, but when they became the band, they just, holed up in Woodstock and made that album.
Yeah.
And then this was their first show. And I think Robbie Robertson was a little sick anyway on the night of the first night of the show, but we played our opening set. I got there early to Winterland because I was a huge fan of the band. So I was like, I want to go meet them, you know? And I got there and I went into their dressing room, which was all painted pink with pink punch. Everything was pink. And I was like, oh no, but they weren't there. And then we went on and did our opening set. It was, sold out for 3 nights at Winterland. So we did our opening set and came up the stage, and there was this big shouting match going on with Bill Graham and Albert Grossman, who managed them. And, and it was like, I mean, I don't know how many words you can say on this podcast. You can say
whatever words you want.
It's like, you fucking get them here. Bill Graham is just screaming, and Albert Grossman is like, no, I can't, like he won't come. He won't. Anyway, it turns out that Robbie Robertson supposedly was afraid to come. And he wasn't feeling well, but also the first show ever as the band was this giant sold out thing in San Francisco, and whatever was happening. And then Bill Graham was like, you get him here. So they ended up sending a hypnotist to the hotel who hypnotized Robbie. And they came to, by then it was like, we'd played a set. The Sons of Champlin played a set. The shouting match happening. Robbie wasn't still there. Sons of Champlin went out and played another set. And the band still, and then the band came with this hypnotist who sat on the stage right in front of Robbie in a chair with his top hat and stared just with his back to the audience, staring at Robbie for the whole show. And
with a little
no, I didn't see a little
pocket watch or whatever.
No little dangling thing going back.
So what was the story like? Well, did you ever find out?
Well, you can, I know maybe he wasn't feeling well, had a fever, wasn't feeling well, but I think he also had stage fright. I think he just really, it was, I think, one of the things I learned from that was, when you need to have some shakedown sessions as a band, no matter who you are and how famous you are. If like years later, I was living in Kauai, and we have a number of hotels here, right? But this was a long time ago. It was, the 70s, late 80s, maybe. No, the 70s. We're talking the 70s. And I heard this band was going to do like a 7 or 10 night run at this hotel right near where I lived in Kauai. And they were Toto, and they had they had made their album. Their album was coming out, and their management brought them here to play together because they hadn't been doing live sessions. And you couldn't get any better studio musicians than who all those guys were. But playing as a band is different than playing in any other way. So they came here and they did, night after night. I remember Maria Muldaur was on the island, and she and I went and hung out and heard them. And they were, it was fantastic. And they did all these great songs that were on their album. And then they came to LA rather than launching in LA and having, the first night not be so good or something, Anyway, I think, so they did the opposite of what the band did. The band just like,
actually went out and practiced before they had
but played live, that's the thing, just actually, just do your show, and I think after that weekend, probably everything was fine for the band, but the first night or two was pretty more pressure.
Yeah. Well, to have a front row seat to a lot of these things back then, that is pretty amazing. That's incredible. I suppose that happened at some Grateful Dead shows too.
Yeah, yes. I mean, we were played shows with them, and when we weren't playing, if they were, I would often go, but I never knew. Then so yes, the answer to that is yes.
I mean, were you able to circle back? You said you kind of had a relationship with Jerry and Pigpen.
Well, Mountain Girl was my really good friend. Right.
Oh, okay. So you hung out with them. What was it? What was that like?
I mean, we still are really dear friends, and that's when First Sunshine was born. When there was a time up at La Honda. This was when Mountain Girl was Kesey's main girlfriend.
Yeah.
And I was sitting with Jerry It's like sitting on a log somewhere, just under the trees, And Mountain
Right.
Girl walked by, and Jerry looked at me and he said, "I'd give up music to be with Mountain Girl."
Well, fortunately, he didn't have to.
Yeah, but I got it. I just said, I totally understand. I mean, she's so amazing, you know. Jerry and I were friends, and you know, he, yeah,
Was he as cool as he seemed to like? I never got to meet
yeah,
him,
he
but
was totally cool. He's an amazing artist and everything. I think as I, um, looking back now, I
yeah,
think he wasn't as cool of a dad as I wish he'd been.
as it would have seemed. Yeah, I
Yes.
could imagine he wasn't around a lot.
And even when he was around, I don't think he was, I just think that wasn't his strong thing. And I think that was hard for
Right.
his daughters. Um,
Yeah. Well,
um,
that was the interesting thing about Ace of Cups is that, well, why weren't there so many? I heard you speak about why there weren't so many all female bands, and I think didn't that play into why you guys didn't continue? Is some of you wanted to have children, some of you had some family obligations, while your male counterparts could just do that and continue to tour. Women, obviously were gonna take care of their kids and birth children.
I,
um, was that a big factor in Ace of Cups kind of not coming out of the 70s as a band?
well, I think I mean, we had our first child in the band in '68, and then Mary, that was Marla's daughter Scarlett, and then in '69,
Mhm.
Mary Gannon had Talina, and
Mhm.
um, that made it a lot different, and
Yeah.
and had we gotten a big record deal, maybe
Yeah.
we could have afforded to take nannies with us when we traveled, or like that. But not, you know, not having that, it just was more and more challenging to be devoting, so much time away from the kids, and not having as much support to care for them and know that they were well taken care of. And we did it, but it sort of was a you know it just got more and more challenging, to be moms and be playing in bands and not have a record deal or have that kind of financial support. Still trying to make our rent, and I'm
Yeah.
so
What were some of the factors of not getting a record deal, do you think?
I think um, I think some of the factors were the fact that we had 5 lead singers, so we didn't just have like a person to focus on. So the kind of the attention of, or the mantle of lead person went all through the band, and that wasn't
Yeah.
as usual.
Mhm.
And I think there weren't any other all women's bands signed at that point. I think the record
Right.
labels they were always looking for like the next, then who's the next Beatles, or who's the next Birds, or who.
Yeah, of
And I
course.
just think we didn't fit into any, uh, you know, image or idea that they could, we weren't a Janis Joplin or a Grace Slick. Um, so we, and we were much more eclectic. Our music, I mean, you can hear, because you can hear it on the records that we've made. It isn't just in one style. We kind of have, because we all write and we have different musical influences. So we never
Right.
felt like we had to not, we had to make ourselves be in a particular box. And
Yeah, yeah.
we still don't. And luckily, we have a record label who loves
So
us.
how did that come back around and come back full circle? And it's such an amazing story that you guys were able to do that, and now you've put together a couple albums and hopefully tour
Yes, we
maybe,
got to
but
tour not COVID summer, but the summer before.
no.
We got to tour, and it was incredible. It was so much fun. We
Wow.
went to New York and played on the Today Show, and went to Philly
Saw
and
that, yeah.
played on NPR's the World Cafe, and played the Mercury Lounge, and it was really, and we
Yeah, I
played.
love it. It's like a time capsule. It
Yeah.
must have been just an amazing trip for you guys. How did you guys decide to finally get back together, and what was sort of the catalyst for that?
Well, in 19 like 97 or 8, there was a fellow who reached out to me named Alec Palau, who worked for a record label out of England called Ace Records. And
Mm-hmm.
he knew our music. He was interested in our music, and he also knew about a record that I'd made before I was in the Ace of Cups, when I was still on the bus. That was sort of a cult classic hit called "Boy, What'll You Do Then," that was never allowed to be played on the radio because we were told women couldn't say that. So Bill Gavin, who said in those days what went on the radio in the Bay Area, had a thing called the Gavin Report. He said, no, you can't, women can't say that, because it was, about not being monogamous, and it was about, not being owned by a guy. And
Right.
he said, it's too raw. You can't say that. We can't put that on the radio. So that
Yeah.
song had a cult life of its
Meanwhile, guys are singing about all kinds of stuff all the time.
own.
So, right.
Right. And so, anyway, so Alec had tracked me down and asked if, does the Ace of Cups have any tapes from the old days? And we did. And Mary Gannon and Marla and our friend Lolly Lewis and Diane had cataloged some of these tapes, all reel-to-reel tapes. And they were rehearsal tapes that our a road manager, Frank Pulte, mostly recorded just for us to hear what we sounded like, so we could work, like work tapes for us, like off the side of a stage, not made from a board. They were just whatever they were, but
Mm-hmm.
they were never meant to be out there. They were for us. But anyway,
Right.
Alec Palau went through all of those tapes and cataloged them and chose what was the best of what we had, which wasn't necessarily what we would have chosen to put on an album, but there were songs we might have put on an album, but we didn't have recordings or full recordings or any good recordings of. So anyway, we ended up releasing an album of old live tapes, made culled from old live tapes, in about 2003. And that was the
Mm-hmm.
first time anybody who wasn't there in the 60s
Yeah.
heard us. And that was, then we had a little website, and people started reaching out that were interested in the music of that time. And
Right.
from that, some years later, we heard from a guy named Jordan Bayer Wallace, who had started this boutique label in New York, that was kind of particularly dedicated to the music of that era, and either unreleased music or things that had gone out of print, like Albert Lee. Not Albert Lee. Love music, and
Yeah.
just going blank, but a number of really interesting artists from that era who had really cool music that wasn't out anymore. And
Right.
his record label, High Moon Records, was doing basically reissues of great old music.
Yeah.
And he wanted to know if we had any music. And I said, well, because he had heard the first record, the live record. And I said, most of the good stuff, you heard it already. There wasn't that much. But we became friends, and he came out to LA, and I was living in Venice at the time, and he came over one night, and I played a bunch of music for him on my that I had recorded through the years. And then we got invited to play. The Ace of Cups got invited to play for Wavy Gravy's 75th birthday party with
Uh-huh.
with Kim Ock and Bobby Weir and a bunch of other people. Chris Robinson. People were playing for this
Yeah.
big show for the Save a Foundation. And
When was that?
it was at the Craneway Pavilion in 2011.
Okay.
And George Bear Wallace said, if you girls want to play that gig, I will, make sure you have transportation to get there, because a couple were in Hawaii, and I will rent you a house and rehearsal space, and you should practice for, and play that gig. So we did. And after that, three of us, Mary Ellen and Diane and I, our guitar player and drummer, and I started getting together every couple of 2-3 months for about 5 or 6 days, and playing and writing. And we did
Right.
that for 2 years. And George sponsored that, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to do it.
Right. I was going to ask if your friends also lived in Hawaii. No.
I was living. I lived in Venice Beach.
Oh, that was when you were in Venice. Okay. Yeah.
So I still live there. I still live. I'm sort of back. I have a home there, but
Oh, okay.
I haven't been there. I've been on our family farm with my daughter and her husband and her family, my grandson and my son-in-law since March.
Right.
I mean, if I was
Right.
going to ride out COVID somewhere, I came to our farm where we grow organic food and we,
Yeah, you think? I mean, that was kind of
yeah.
like
So, and my family, they have a music store and little performance venue here, which is, and
Oh,
they
wow, that's so
sell like
cool.
handmade beautiful ukuleles. It's called Hanali Strings, and it's they
Are you in Honolulu?
there. We're the store is in Hanalei.
Yeah.
We are outside Kilauea in the farm area.
Oh, okay. Wow, beautiful, beautiful. So, yeah, you started to get together, you started to practice, and
And we
then it
were
just
just
kinda
writing,
happened,
and
and yeah,
and then after a while, George just said to us, "You need to go into a studio. You never got a chance to take your music into a studio. You need
right,
to find a producer and go into a studio."
right,
And
right.
after some searching and through Diane, our drummer, we found Dan Shea, our producer. And
Uh-huh.
then we started recording some of our old songs that we had never gotten a chance to,
Yeah,
record, and then some new ones. And we started like, okay, we picked like 12 songs, and then Dan would say, well, we have to figure out whether we're going to do simplicity or feel good, or something. And then George would say, you have to do both of them. So it went from
yeah.
12 songs to 16 to 21 to 36. Um, and we
Yeah,
still have more to go.
it's a good long listen, I really
Yeah.
liked it.
And that's so the first album turned out to be, we released that as a double album. And then
Uh-huh.
the new one is a single album, and we'll have another single album after that, which is like halfway done, but we have more songs to put on to record.
Oh, cool. So, forthcoming in 2021.
Or maybe we'll see how soon we can get back to a studio.
Yeah, oh, yeah, true, yeah,
It was
uh-huh.
supposed to be in 2021. We'll see.
So what was that like? You said you went back on the road. What was that like compared to when you'd been on the road with your friends and bandmates before,
It was so
years and
much
years
fun.
and years ago?
I
Yeah,
mean, we got to play the Kate Wolf Festival which was like the whole hog farm wavy gravy world, which we, like love. And
yeah, yeah,
that, and, we camped, Diane and I, I rented an RV. My daughter and grandson came. My grandson's a really great musician.
yeah.
He just graduated music school in Liverpool, England, but he's back on the farm now. He just signed a record deal. He's a great musician. So
And
he
what's his name?
his name is Eli Smart,
Okay.
and you check him out. Eli Smart.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah,
sure, for sure. Eli Smart. Okay.
yeah. And so to have my daughter and my grandson camping and then in the RV at Kate Wolf, for me, that was, and Eli sided with us on a couple of sets that we played, and then Diane was camping with her friends. It was just so much fun,
Yeah,
and just to be on the hog farm, because I supported Camp Winter Rainbow for years. My grandson had gone to Camp Winter Rainbow, which is right on the same land as the Kate Wolf Festival, and
right.
so
Which
we
is
were
like
with our people,
Wavy's. It's like Wavy's
Gravy
It's
and
his organization. Uh huh.
Yeah.
And who?
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful camp for kids. It's the most magical place on earth, is Camp Winter Rainbow, where the
Wow.
best of the values of the '60s are completely embodied, and kids. It's a circus and performing arts camp, but really more than that, it's a place
Right.
that nourishes the souls of children. All the Grateful Dead
He's
kids went
so
there. You know,
he's so amazing. He's
he
so
is so
amazing. I love
amazing.
him so
Well,
much. I
we
love him
have his
so much.
song on the new album, right?
Yeah, I saw that, and was that's the one with the video as
Yeah,
well, that
it's
really
got a
beautiful
great
video?
video that
Yeah,
we made. Yeah.
and he's great. He's like he's a I think that's the first time I've ever heard him sing.
Yeah.
He's really
Yes, he's a
good.
wonderful singer. I mean,
Yeah.
the funny thing
Well,
working.
he's a storyteller, like
Yes,
Garcia would say. It's about
yes.
telling the stories. That's
He
what
was a
Bobby
he
would
was a
say
great
too.
poet. He
Yeah,
he toured. He played with like Charlie Mingus. He would do the poetry set between different jazz artists. I mean,
right.
he's he's a poet and an actor as Hugh Romney, and so
Yep, yep,
he was in the Second City in Chicago.
right.
So he's
So you've been in the scene for just so long. It's just so amazing to talk to you and hear a lot of these stories
yeah,
about, everywhere you turned, you ran into somebody that was connected with somebody else. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
is that a coincidence, or are you just really good at meeting people? I think it's kind of both.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of been my mission. I mean, as far as, or my, you know, um, it's just that's been my life. My my good friends in LA who are all the record industry people and stuff. They
Hmm.
like they always joke about it, just like that. I was kind of like, oh, whether it was being arrested in the free speech movement. Oh, another piece of that was when I was pregnant with my daughter and
Yeah.
married to my ex-husband, who is a jazz player in the Bay Area, Noel Jukes. We had, I was 5 months pregnant, and we went to the Altamont concert. And I was sitting, or Noel and I were sitting way up on the side, not near the front, not near the stage. And it was like the afternoon, it wasn't even nightfall yet. And somebody lobbed a quart beer bottle high in the air from behind us. I never saw it, but it landed on my temple and cracked my
Oh,
skull. And I ended up having neurosurgery in San Francisco, back at Mount Zion Hospital where I had lived. As I,
oh,
yeah,
seriously?
yeah, same hospital, but they, because Livermore Hospital was the closest to Altima, but they didn't have neurosurgeons there, so they took me
Right.
there first, and then to San Francisco, and then I had this, you know, and then I woke up with like the news in my room, the newscast. It was a big deal. One of the Ace of Cups was, who was
Yeah.
pregnant was, had her skull fractured at Altamont, so it's kind of a thing. It was okay. I mean, I was fine, and my daughter
Yeah, you were
was
okay, and
great. So
your daughter's
yeah,
yeah. But you've that's just one of many, many experiences that you've had, I mean, since then, and then to come back, and then this album is so, like, sonically similar to what you had been doing before. It's really cool to listen to these amazing, like, clean recordings and, to hear this it's kind of like a '60s vibe, but by modern women. It's like it's really cool. It's amazing.
thank you. We
Mm,
were wanted to when we started working with Dan Shea. Um, we talked about what we wanted to do, and
yeah.
we wanted to, and he grew up in Mill Valley. He grew up,
Ah,
one of his mentors was John Cipollina's mother, Evelyn, who was a classical pianist, and Dan
right.
Shea was a pianist. And and Evelyn used to take little Dan Shea when he was a little boy to shows. And so he probably heard us play, on Mount Tam at some show or with Quicksilver
Yeah.
in the old days. So, uh, he has really the sensibility of those times, but also has produced a lot of people. And so he kind of had that broad background that we needed because, we hadn't I mean, we didn't. It's not like we had that much studio experience in the days of 60 analog days. Anyway, I mean, we did as singers, but
Yeah.
less as players. But this
Right.
whole thing now is totally different. So
Yeah, I mean, you were getting together with your old bandmates, but you hadn't really had done this before. So there's always something new. There's always new experiences, even when you're revisiting kind of a certain vibe from
yes,
before, and everyone gets another chance, or not even like a second chance, but like a first chance to
right.
do what maybe you would have done before. I'm well familiar with that effect
Really,
in my own life, and I think it's wonderful and it's brilliant. And I congratulate you for it.
thank you.
It's so awesome.
It's
Um, what was the apart from your own personal experience? How was the reception that you're getting when you're playing your shows on the road?
it's been lovely, and people
Yeah,
have been great. And I think um, we've afterwards, then we have like some T-shirts and we have albums or whatever, vinyl.
yeah,
Just
yeah.
and so we get to hang out with people.
Merch,
We have some
merch,
merch,
merch.
not a lot, but some, and
Yeah,
but it gives us a total chance to hang out with people, and
right,
and
right.
and it's been great. I think our audiences have been both sort of more contemporaries in some places, and also their children and grandchildren, and to have like you know a dad bring his little girl and right up to the front while we're playing so she can watch Diane just kick ass on the drums or Mary Ellen just play some great lead guitar or
Yeah.
whatever it is. It's been really amazing to feel like we can bring our music and our kind of messages and our and our sort of shattering of the stereotypes of women of our age, um, to people. And I think it's really important. I think for everybody, it's important to see that women, I mean, we're all in our 70s, except for our newest member, Dallas, who's is a little younger, but our
The one
keyboard
who plays keys. Yeah, I saw
player.
that.
But
Right.
she's younger. But all the original Ace of Cups were all in our 70s, and it's people don't think so much when they see the Rolling Stones play. That, I mean, then no one says the Rolling Stones shouldn't be playing, or maybe some people do, but but they still have fans, and some of the old
Yeah.
still have, and certainly the Grateful Dead,
Right. Right.
I mean, people that are our contemporaries, but because they're, Grace doesn't play live and Janice is gone. And so the women that were our contemporaries there are much less out there now. I think Linda LaFlame from It's a Beautiful Day, she and David still play some, which is great, and a few others. But
Yeah.
and obviously the bands that came behind us, like Fanny, the Millington sisters. I mean, they, so there's wonderful women that are kind of from that era that are out there
Yeah,
still.
well, what struck me so much is that it's the same members. It's like almost like a time capsule of
Yep.
just coming to forward with all this life experience in between, and
Yeah,
it's
nobody ever stopped playing music, so that was the
no, yeah, I
you
understand
know.
that. That's
So
clear. Obviously, you guys were super proficient, and I can't wait for you to get out there again, and I can't wait to meet you in the flesh at some point on tour, and maybe
that'll be
even in
so
Venice
fun.
Beach, where I like to go every once in a while. So that's one of my favorite places to hang
Yeah,
out.
we played the Venice Beach Festival, Milton Rosenberg's festival that he puts in. I think it's been going every year for the Free Festival for something like, I want to say 17 years or 16 years he's been doing it. And this last summer was the first time. I couldn't have it.
No kidding.
We
Where is
played it
that?
the year before, right on Venice Beach, like right by the skate park, right? Where
Oh,
Windward hits the,
yeah, like what? Yeah, where Windward hits
yeah,
Pacific or
it's
something, right?
Ocean
Like right
Park.
there where
Yeah, Ocean
the
Front, Ocean
skateboard park is.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. What time of the year does that happen?
It usually happens in like August.
Oh, yeah, okay, uh-huh.
And so,
Well, I'm living in Chicago, so I generally try to go out there a lot in the winter,
right.
but but I'll have to make it out in August and check out this festival.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Awesome,
God,
awesome.
God willing, it will be this next summer.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Yeah.
Let's hope she is, right?
Yes.
Oh, there was one other thing I wanted to talk about you. Also, when you guys originally came back, or was it for this recent album that it was a celebration in coordination with the women's suffrage movement and original Voting Rights Act in 1919? Can you talk about that a little bit, especially in terms of, we're having a woman in the White House now.
Yes.
So, or at
Yes.
least periodically when she's invited by the president
Right.
over from her residence
Oh,
across the
she's going to be
street,
there a
which
lot.
is hopefully a lot.
She's
But that
going to
must
be there
feel
a lot.
that must be amazing. You must be
Yeah.
like, that's
It's
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah. I just wanted to talk and like express my support for that as
Thank
well.
you.
And
Thank
this
you,
kind of
Josh.
all fits into the general picture and stuff, right?
Yeah, well, when we were making the new album, obviously it was before the Democratic Convention, so we didn't know if Elizabeth Warren. I mean, there was more women in the field still, but
Yeah.
Dallas is our newest member. Lead sings on our song "Put a Woman in Charge," which is our cover of Keb Mo's great song,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
but we kind of rocked it. He had a little bit more. We have this sort of 6/8 rock feel, and we changed the song a little bit with his permission. But we love singing "Put a Woman in Charge," um, and we coordinated its release with the 100 years from when the women first got the right to vote. And I want to say that was white women. Not everybody got the right to vote then, but that was the beginning of women's suffrage. And then,
Right. Yeah.
black women didn't get to vote till later in the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Right.
Brought many more people in, but then it's been gutted, particularly in the last some years. So
Yeah.
so the,
Yeah.
the issue of voter suppression and um, suffrage, how we make sure that every person
Right, how it's evolved recently, like
Yes.
over like
Yes.
with to go beyond
Gerrymandering
race
districts
and
so that people don't, aren't represented. So,
right, right,
we're
right.
really interested in that. I'm super active in those areas. My focus now is on, well, my focus earlier was on getting people to vote, and voter registration. And we made a couple of videos about it that were, that we released in social media.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
now my focus is Georgia, and supporting groups that are led by people of color, that are mobilizing communities of color, because that's who brought Biden home for us in Georgia.
Right.
Only 29%
Yeah, yeah.
of white people in
And
Georgia.
hopefully we'll bring Georgia back again.
Yes.
But this isn't a politics
Right.
podcast, but yeah, we all hope that what happened
Yeah.
in Georgia.
I'm,
Yeah.
I'm, I'm, yeah. If you could get me started, I could talk for a long time about all that. So yeah. Yeah.
We'll save that for part 2.
Okay. Anyway,
Well, thanks
I'm,
thanks so much. Thanks so much. I'm so excited about everything that you're doing,
thank you
and
so much,
I wish
Josh.
you
It was
I
really
wish you
great to get a chance to talk with you. And
Yeah, same here. You're like San Francisco music royalty to
thank
me.
you. Well, still standing, still
I
standing, still,
that's one of the that's one of the important components of
is
this.
still standing, still
Yeah.
stretching.
I wish it
Still,
were needless to say, but you got to still be around, and that's not to go in that weird direction, but you guys are
yeah,
still all around,
and
which
still
is like
dancing.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
And thanks, Denise, for being on Roadcase. I really appreciate your time, and best of luck to you. Okay, there we go. Denise Kaufman with Ace of Cups, and just like, wow. What a life. I mean, that's amazing. She's such a vibrant and amazing human, and she was a totally fun hang at the time. I love her perspective of just like being on the bus, sitting on what she called it, like a little box up there at the front of the bus, just sitting there listening to Neil Cassidy tell stories as he drives the further bus with the merry pranksters down all the way to Mexico. I mean, or kicking back with Garcia, talking to him about his future girlfriend at the time, Mountain Girl, whom Denise is still friends with, as she is with Bobby Weir and others from the time. I mean, it's just so fucking cool. And not only that, I mean, Ace of Cups, they're this all-female band from the 60s, which was a very unique thing. I mean, there were no female bands. Yeah, there were female front women, Grace Slick and Janis Joplin, but to have an entire female band, and they didn't get a record deal. And that's had to be frustrating, but to come back, you always get a second chance to do what you really want to do, or you get a first chance to do something that didn't present itself before. And I'm really happy for Ace of Cups that they are able to do that and attack it the way they're attacking. And it'll be a really interesting experience to see them perform. But to hear Denise's stories was amazing to me, and I really enjoyed that interview. I wish them the best of luck in what they do going forward, and I just think Denise is a great human, and I love this interview with her. So thanks again to Denise for being on Roadcase. Thanks again so much for listening. And I'd like to encourage everyone to get involved with Roadcase. You can do so in a number of different ways. You can email me at info@roadcasepod.com with questions, comments, and even suggestions for guests. Or you can follow us on the socials, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We're at RoadcasePod. And we have a YouTube channel called Roadcase Podcast. And if you are able to and like to support Roadcase, we have a Patreon site at patreon.com/RoadcasePod. And of course, you can subscribe to this podcast on your favorite listening platform. And if you could please rate and review the podcast while you're there, that would be great. So I want to thank Walzer for this awesome theme music that we have. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening to Roadcase. We have a lot of great episodes coming up, so I'll see you on down the road.